I've been asked to demonstrate and record the way I teach some muscle groups of the hand. We're talking about the intrinsic muscle groups of the hand, the lumbricals, the palmar interossei, and the dorsal interossei. Now I understand that there's confusion with these muscle groups. They're somewhat difficult to understand because there are multiple slips on each of these groups, and even among the groups themselves there are sometimes different motions that need to be taken with each muscle. So let's forget about what we've learned. Let's forget about what we understand about these muscle groups, especially if we've tried to just memorize the motions. We're going to talk about functional anatomy of the lumbricals, the palmar interossei, and the dorsal interossei in a way that I hope will make it a little bit simpler to understand. Some concepts first to think about during this demonstration. First of all, the center of the hand is going to be in the center of the third digit. And so when we talk about adduction or adduction, what we mean is any digit or any movement that moves towards the midline. And when we talk about abduction of the digit, we are talking about any movement that happens away from the midline. That is true in all digits. Towards the midline is adduction, and away from the midline is abduction. Another thing to think about is that when the muscles contract, all of these muscles, lumbricals, palmar interossei, and dorsal interossei, when these muscles contract, they will act on the MCP joint to flex it, and they will act on the two IP joints to extend them. And so this is the shortened position of all three of these muscles. The lengthened position of all three of these muscles then is to extend the MCP joint and flex the two IP joints, just like that. Now, if we remember that for all three of these muscle groups, all we have to think about is one additional movement. So, let's get down to the first group, the lumbricals. The lumbricals are going to move every digit towards the thumb. That is sometimes going to be abduction. It is sometimes going to be adduction. In this case, for the lumbricals, let's just remember that they will move all fingers towards the thumb, in addition to flexing the MCP joint and extending the two IP joints. And so, for the second digit, the first lumbrical, we are going to shorten it by flexing the MCP joint, extending two IP joints, and moving the finger towards the thumb. This is the same for the third digit, the fourth digit, and the fifth digit. So, shortened position, flexed MCP, extended IPs, and in this case, abduction or movement towards the thumb. And in order to lengthen this muscle, we would move the digit into extension at the MCP joint, flexion at both IP joints, and moving it away from the thumb. The same for each of these muscles, away from the thumb with flexion of the IP joints and extension of the MCP joint. In order to remember where the lumbricals lie in relationship to the digit, keep in mind that a muscle is going to act on the digit by pulling it, contracting and pulling. So I like to explain it like this. If you were the lumbrical and your job was to pull the finger towards the thumb, you would want to place yourself on the thumb side of the finger. And so all of the lumbricals, they reside on the thumb side of the digit. The thumb side of the digit. And so contacting the lumbrical for the first lumbrical is on the thumb side of the second digit, the second lumbrical on the third digit, and so on. That is the lumbrical. Now, the palmar interossei, in addition to flexing the MCP joint, extending the two IP joints, it also moves the digit towards the midline. The palmar interossei is an adductor, a deductor of each digit. So, for the second digit, the palmar interossei is going to shorten by flexing the MCP joint, extending the two IP joints, and moving the digit towards the midline. That is the job of the palmar interossei. In order to lengthen the palmar interossei, then, we're going to extend the MCP joint, we're going to flex both IP joints, and we are going to move the digit away from the midline. That works for the second digit, the fourth digit, and the fifth digit. The reason why there is no palmar interossei for the third digit is because it is already at the midline. It does not adduct any more than that, and so there is no adductor for it. Therefore, there is no palmar interossei for the third digit. So the first palmar interossei is going to shorten by flexing at the MCP, extending at both IPs, and because its job is to adduct, it will be adducted towards the midline, and to lengthen it, we're going to do the opposite. We're going to extend the MCP, flex both IP joints, and move it away from the midline. We're going to do the same thing with the fourth and the fifth. Flex the MCP, extend the two IP joints, and then to lengthen it, we're going to extend the MCP and move it away, flex the IPs and move it away from the midline. Same thing with the fifth. Now let's talk about the dorsal interossei. Keep in mind that in addition to the action on the MCP and the IP joints, the dorsal interossei is also going to be an abductor of the digit. What that means is it is going to act, when shortened, to move the digit away from the midline. For the first dorsal interossei, on the second digit, that means that shortened is going to be flexed at the MCP, extended on the IP joints, and it is going to be away towards the thumb to shorten it, and in order to lengthen it, we're going to extend the MCPs, flex both IP joints, and we are going to adduct, or towards the midline in this direction, in order to lengthen it. For the fourth digit, we are going to do the same thing, keeping in mind that the dorsal interossei is an abductor, and so when we shorten it, we're going to flex the MCP, extend the two IP joints, and we are going to move it away from the midline, and in order to shorten it, we're going to extend the MCP, flex the IP, and move it towards the midline. Now, it gets a little bit more confusing when we talk about the third digit, because the third digit can abduct in both directions, away from the midline this way and away from the midline this way. And so there's two sets of dorsal interossei on both sides of the third digit. We're going to work on both of them. And so we flex the MCP, extend the IP joints on the third digit. We move into abduction in the first direction towards the thumb. And in order to lengthen it, we move the MCP into extension. We move the IP joints into flexion, and we move it away from the thumb again to lengthen. And we also do the same thing in the opposite direction, same motions of the MCP and the IP joints, except this time, in order to lengthen it, we're going to move the other, this time we're going to move the other dorsal interossei towards the thumb. So, think about if we were the dorsal interossei muscle and our job was to abduct, if our job was to move the finger away from the midline, we would pull from the side away from the midline. And so we would be on the side of the digit away from the midline. So here for the second digit, here and here for the third digit, and here for the fourth digit. The other thing about the dorsal interossei that is interesting is there is no dorsal interossei for the fifth digit. This is because of the abductor digiti minimi is already doing this action. And so we don't need another dorsal interossei at the fifth digit. So that concludes all three groups of the intrinsic muscles of the hand. I hope this clears up any confusion that you might have had. If you have questions, feel free to send me an email, get me on WhatsApp. I am down here in Costa Rica, and so come visit me. It was great to do this video, and I hope it helps.